Our next speaker is none other than Dr. Farzana Hussain. She's been a GP in Newham for more than 20 years now. And today she's going to share with us her experiences of losing her GP partner to suicide, becoming a single-handed partner in her practice, and what got her through to where she is today, which I can say is absolutely a power force in general practice, if I can say so myself. So welcome, Farzana, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meera. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me your time. There's nearly 100 of us on this call, so thank you in this busy time. So when I was asked what makes a GP, I had to think really hard. And I think similar to what Duncan was saying, I think what makes a GP is what makes us very human. I had always wanted to be a GP, and I'm just coming up to my 20th year in a few weeks in August. So, any of you who are just about to qualify, a huge congratulations to you. It really does feel like it was yesterday, even though it was 2 decades ago. And my own son has just applied for medical school. So, time flies. But a huge congratulations to you if you're just starting out, and I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I am doing 2 decades later. So, I'm going to share my story with you over the next half an hour or 20 minutes, and then I'd be more than happy if you'd like to ask me anything that you want to, or say anything that you want to. I think this is particularly important at this time when, of course, we're living through a pandemic, something that I never thought I would see, and we're not quite out of it either. So, healthcare, of course, has been absolutely put at the front and center of everybody's mind, and this is a disease that's happening all over the world. So, we are living in very different times, but never have I been prouder to be a GP working in the NHS, particularly as I'm really proud to be in a country where we will serve everybody regardless of their financial status. So, as I said, I always wanted to be a GP from the time I went into medical school. I didn't particularly enjoy medical school. I didn't like the anatomy. I didn't like all the facts, and I found it, to be truthful, a little bit scientific and over my head and a bit boring for me. My favourite subjects in school were English literature and were French and were history. But I wanted to be a doctor. My father is a retired anaesthetist, and I don't think it's any lie to say he was quite keen on me being a doctor. When I was 19, in my very first term of medical school, I grew up in Preston in Lancashire and I trained in Cardiff, mainly because I didn't get the grades for Manchester or Liverpool. I had to resit my maths A level. And Cardiff is over 200 miles from Preston. And I came back over the Christmas holiday, ending my first term. And my mum was quite ill. She had been suffering from heart failure secondary to diabetes, which she didn't control very well. And she was very sick, and I went to see her in hospital in January of 1993. And she looked very frail, and she was sitting not on her bed but on the chair, as you probably know in hospital, the patient's chair. And she looked so small and so frail in it, and she looked almost slumped in her chair. And although I really had no medical knowledge, I knew she didn't look well. And I said on the Sunday evening, about to get my train, Mum, and I used to call her Ummi because I'm a British Bangladeshi, and I said, Ummi, do you want me to go back, or do you want me to stay with you for the week? And she looked me right in the eye and she said, Of course I want you to go back. I want you to be a doctor. She died 5 days later. I've always remembered that, even though I was only 19, and perhaps that very strong, powerful patient experience has maybe shaped the doctor that I am. So I did get through all the anatomy, I did get through all the physiology just. I was never an honours or a merit person, but I just scraped through and passed. And when I became a third year, we didn't have integrated curriculums back in my dinosaur days. We did preclinical work and then clinical work. And when I became a third year and got introduced to clinical work, I started on a surgical firm, and the consultant said, "Well, there you go, Farzana, you take the history from this family, and I'll come and see you in half an hour." I don't know what came over me. I got really excited and really nervous, and I thought, this is my own clinic. I've got my own patient. The patient had breast cancer and she was being pre-clocked for a mastectomy. And that day I realized how much I love talking and how much I love talking to patients. And I absolutely knew I wanted to be a GP. And then the years passed, and even I qualified. And then I was moving to London because I had an arranged marriage, and my husband at the time, we're separated now, going through a divorce, was training to be a surgeon, and he wanted to stay in London, and all his family were in London. So, as a dutiful Asian woman, I moved and I came to London. What I didn't realise is that it's quite difficult to find jobs in London if you haven't trained in London. So I rang about 80 hospitals all over London, and I got an interview in this place called Newham in East London. I was coming on the train from Cardiff to this interview, and as I was getting the tube, moving from what looked like a very beautiful station in Paddington, moving into East London, seeing more graffiti, seeing more dirt, I thought, do I really want to work here? Anyway, I got the job because I think I was probably the only candidate, and my surgical consultant was about to retire. And then I thought, well, I'll just do my GP training here in Newham because I know it now. I've done one of my what we called house jobs for FIs. But I'll move after that. I really don't want to stay in Newham. It's hard in Newham. 74% of Newham is BAME. English is not a first language for most people. I don't even understand what they're saying. There's no health literacy. I really don't want to work in Newham. There's easier places I could work. And then another year went by, and another year went by. And I began to realize, even as a junior doctor, when I was doing my obstetrics firm up all night, and I'll never forget the way that the lady who spoke Spanish only, that I don't speak a word of, squeezed my hand when I was about to leave the shift first thing in the morning. And I realized that she was scared because she had preeclampsia. And I'll never forget the squeeze that she gave me. Of course, I left and went home and got some sleep, and I found out that she'd delivered a lovely baby the next day. But I'm talking about a memory from 23 years ago. Then I wanted to become a GP, and we had lots of training practices in Newham, and I chose the training practice of the then course organizer, we would call program directors of the VTS. I knew them both, and I was really fortunate to have been offered the position in one of the program directors practices. It was a great year, the year of 2000. I was out of my hospital job. There was no more sleepless nights, and I was absolutely loving running my own clinics. I had a very supportive training practice and an absolutely fantastic trainer called Peter Jones. I trained there for a year, and after that, I got offered a partnership there, so I stayed on. It was fantastic to be at the same practice with the same support where I was training. And then Peter Jones, my trainer, my informal mentor, my course organizer, got sick. He was off work for 6 months. His other three partners firstly didn't say anything to me, and then we discovered that Peter had recurrent depression and he had been in hospital before. That only made me admire Peter even more. I had no idea that he suffered from a mental health illness, and it also made me realize perhaps one of the reasons why he was such an empathetic and fantastic doctor. Peter got better. After a few months, he got better and he was back to work again full time as the lead GP in our practice. But after that, a bit like Duncan was saying, Peter decided to review things and wondered whether a large practice with 4 other partners was what would work for him. He asked me if I wanted to set up a practice with him. I was pregnant at the time, 29, very excited, had just become a GP partner, got my dreams, and was also pregnant. What more could I ask for? I got quite sick in pregnancy and I had hyperemesis, and it was the first time ever I had taken time off work, and I got admitted with premature labour. That helped me to remember that although I was a doctor, I'm still a human being and a person just like everybody else. In 2003, after my little one was born, who's now 18 and applied for medical school, I set up a community surgery with Peter. We got given a grant from the government to set up a surgery. It was a urban regeneration grant where they asked the community, what do you want? Do you want a school? Do you want other things? Do you want play facilities? And they all said, we want a GP surgery. There are not enough GP surgeries in our area. And that's how my practice, the Project Surgery, was born. And within a year, we went from 0 patients to 3,000 patients, and we now look after 5,000 patients in a very deprived area of East London, where Newham has had the highest COVID death rates in the country. I had a fantastic time in 2003, really busy. A second child came along. I certainly wouldn't advise having 2 children 11 months apart. And yes, I still do give contraceptive advice, although I may not be the best person. 2 little children, a husband who was quite busy with his surgical career, not at home, and a partner in a practice. I had the most fantastic support from Peter, and I learned a lot, and I learned how to run a practice. And it was so great being part of the community that only a few years previously I had said I would never stay in because it was such hard work and there was quite a lot of litter on the floor. I began to realize how grateful my patients in Plaistow are for anything we do for them. Not many complaints. I still remember very early on a lady telling me that I'd changed her life, and I'd given her a bit of tranexamic acid just because she had heavy periods. It wasn't a cancer diagnosis, she hadn't had major surgery, but she had had heavy periods from the age of 12, and I saw her when she was 40, and she had been never able to say that to her previous male doctor, and she was too embarrassed to tell her husband. So for her, I changed her life. And that stays with me because it's such a small thing that we did. Fast forward a couple of years, my children got bigger, they finally started school. Any young mums in the audience will know what I mean when I said, what a sigh of relief. I actually had half an hour to go to the toilet without 2 people around my neck. And the surgery grew and things got better and busier as the NHS has got busier over the years, and we started getting a bit more regulated with things like CQC inspections coming in, appraisals coming in. But we were enjoying ourselves. Peter and I had a passion for running a small family orientated community practice. And then in November 2013, when Peter had been well and hadn't had an admission for over 2 years and had reduced his antidepressants and was seeming absolutely fine, he died suddenly on the 13th of November. I had spoken to him the night before at about 8:30, and we were talking about whether we would recruit a new salaried doctor. And when he didn't come into work on the Thursday morning, I knew something was wrong because apart from his depression, Peter was as fit as a fiddle. He never was even off with a cold. I was always so very jealous. I drove to his flat and I couldn't get in and there was no answer. So we called the police and the police came in and broke the door down. And he lay there completely dressed on his bed, looking so peaceful and cold and stiff. And he'd probably been dead for about 10, 12 hours. My world stopped that day in 2030. But that was nearly 8 years ago. I wasn't quite sure what to do. So the first call I made was to the accountants. And I said, I'm not sure what to do, but my partner's just died. Looking back, it's really odd how we cope with things. We wouldn't necessarily think of calling the medical accountants. They were very supportive. It was flu season, and my salary doctor was on maternity leave, so I was held with 4,000 patients at the time on a winter's day running a surgery by myself. I had a 9 and a 10-year-old, and I wasn't sure how we would get through. So I got my little team together, we're only 10, and I spoke to them and I said, I think you should all look for different jobs because I'm not sure whether I'll be able to continue. I don't know whether I'll have the time. I don't know whether I'm in the right headspace. I don't know what I'm going to do without our senior partner and my mentor. And it was my then 20-year-old healthcare assistant who said, well, we're not going anywhere. Why don't we just take a day at a time? And how can you do this when you love your patients so much? Let's just see how we go. And I thought, gosh, if you're 20 years old and I'm 40 and you can give me that advice, let's just see how we go. So we took a day at a time. And it got a bit less painful to go into the room where he and I used to chat. And it got a bit less painful to see all the letters that were coming with his name on. And time passed. And I'm really proud to say that now we run one of the best known surgeries in the country, and we've been recognised for lots of our work, such as our drive-through clinics. And the reason I share that with you is because when we talk about what makes a GP, we never really know what hidden strengths we have until we need to use them. If you had asked me, would you be able to run a practice on your own with a 9 and a 10-year-old when your senior partner and your mentor has passed away, I would without hesitation have said no to you. But actually, 8 years later, here we are. And I've seen this through the pandemic. I've seen from junior doctors to nurses to healthcare assistants really see that resolve because they so enjoy and find so much meaning in what they're doing. So I guess my advice, if I was giving any to anybody, would be to think about what makes you resilient, because we're all more resilient than we think we are. What gives you meaning in life? For me, I absolutely adore seeing my patients. Yes, it's really busy. I wouldn't say we don't have complaints. But actually, I feel like I'm making a little difference from giving somebody some tablets that might help them have lighter periods and be able to go out, to actually diagnosing those cancers or doing that, what we'd call the big stuff about the heart attacks and the long-term conditions. I've been fortunate that I've always enjoyed doing lots of things outside my consulting room as well. So I've had a number of other roles over the years. So when my children started school, I became a GP appraiser. And after a few years, I became a GP trainer, which was very nice. And I missed Peter, but I remembered the way he trained me with kindness and compassion, and I wanted to do that myself. I'm pleased to say now one of my salary doctors is a GP trainer, and I've passed that baton on. I've had some out of practice roles. I've been on an LMC, the local medical committee. I've been a director on our GP federation. And those roles, I think, have also helped me keep it fresh, but also helped me look at healthcare from a slightly different angle and a slightly different perspective. And I like learning and doing different things. So that's been quite helpful. And I continue to do that. I like to do lots of other things. Um, but I guess I'd just like to share with you that we are all strong when we need to be. And I think a bit like Duncan said, if it doesn't feel right for you inside and you think something's not quite right. Check in with yourself. If you have a mentor, that's great. If you have a coach, that's great. If you don't, talk to a friend, talk to anybody. It doesn't matter, but just check in and have that time to reflect. And if you're not getting any joy in what you're doing, then do something else. For GPs at the moment, as Duncan said, there's so much opportunity, whether you want to locum, whether you want to be salaried, whether you want to be a partner, however many hours you want to do, whether you want to take more leadership roles. So I'm currently a clinical director for one of our primary care networks, and it's great to see lots of young GPs, not dinosaurs like me, taking on those leadership roles and enjoying it as well. So I think I'm going to stop there. I've talked at you for about 20 minutes and see if anybody wants to talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farzana. That was, I've heard you speak before at various other RCGP things, but every time you get me with you draw me in, you're a natural storyteller, but just to hear your experience. And I did my foundation training in Preston, so I know that route from up north to south, that's a big track journey for anyone, I think. That we've had some lovely comments that from everybody, and I want to just put a few questions to you, if that would be all right. So one of the questions is, if we need to start a surgery now, whom should we approach? If you wanted to start up a project like that, does that still exist? Are we able to do that?
It's a really good question. So I was quite fortunate because the birth of the project surgery was a bit unusual because it wasn't NHS funding. It was like a grant from a community. But certainly there are often surgeries that come up with what we call like the more normal tendering process. You will see quite a number come up, and it's normally your CCG that will say, does anybody have any expressions of interest for this list coming up? And if you are very interested in that, I would approach your CCG. I know they're getting a bit smaller now, but you'll still have somebody at the CCG, probably your primary care director. If you approach your primary care director, they're they're a manager person, and they would be able to let you know. So a lot of those lists do come up. And as I say, I mean, it's fantastic to hear because a number of people in their early years feel, oh, but I don't have the skills to be a partner. I want to be, if you want to be a salaried, and that's a positive decision, or a portfolio locum, that's fine. But never be scared of being a partner, because you can learn. Well, I learned it on the job. I'm not a big reader, so definitely speak to your CCG. I would say the primary care director, and those opportunities do come up. They call them, do you want to tender for a list? It will say like expressions of interest.
Thank you very much, Farzana. That's really, really helpful. And I suppose one of the things you were saying, it's that knowledge of, do you want to be a salaried GP? Do you want to locum? Do you want to do all of these different things? And in that stage of your career, when you're training and trying to pass exams and doing all those things, you may not have even sort of really sat down and thought about it. So it's useful to hear people's routes through this, and actually taking time is fine to kind of figure out what best suits you, which sort of actually goes very well into one of the questions that we've had that said, great talk, Farzana, unsurprisingly. I wish every surgery would be like that. So this particular person's in a dilemma about, they've changed from working as a hospital doctor, I believe, to becoming a GP that they really want. But as a trainee have found it quite difficult in terms of working with non-cooperative members of staff occasionally, and potentially with the changes of the exams that have happened due to COVID, maybe not necessarily being fully in the know with things. So trying to understand how they can get working in an ideal surgery like yours, where everyone's sort of wanting and to work towards a common goal, and helpful with trainees. What would your advice be for them?
Well, the first thing to say is I can't appreciate how difficult it's been for our trainees over the last 2 years, with the whole the pandemic. I know it's nobody's fault, but the whole training and it's all been completely disrupted. And just to get through that, you all have resilience. That's what makes you a good GP, because you've just got through that. It's been so difficult, where nobody really knew at the beginning, or the trainers didn't know what we were doing. I work in a small team, and I think that has some advantages in that obviously there's less people. That we're human beings. The more people we have, the more views we're going to have, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I guess what I would say is the point earlier. There's no rush for this. A bit like Duncan was saying, you can chop and change and try different things. But also, like with the non-cooperative members, I would try and go back to what is it that I feel is non-cooperative about them? Do I think it's personal? So I have quite a number of roles. I'm always itchy-feeted, and in those roles, there's always somebody that I am drawn to more and somebody that I'm drawn to less. Part of that is personality, but part of that might be because they have a different goal to me. So I left a federation board director role because I just realised it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go, and I couldn't influence it. And I felt a bit guilty. And then once I'd done it, I thought, this is so liberating. Now, that took me about 18 years. I only did that about 3 years ago. So it's great that this training is. So don't worry if it's not clicking for you. Try and reflect on why it's not clicking. Could there be some of your own factors in it? There could be. Or is it that actually there's a value that maybe you don't share? And if you think you can't influence it, as Duncan said, there is no harm in going. I said, although I haven't left my practice, I've left my federation board director role, and I recently just left a national role actually with the Confed, which was going great, but there were a few things that I felt didn't quite agree with a very deep core value I had, and I left. And as I say, I felt better for it because I felt that ultimately I was going to be creating more tension because my goal wasn't quite the same as theirs. I don't know if that helps. That helps at all.
Absolutely. I think very wise words, Fazan. I think it brings to mind, I guess, a lot of us are in that position that, as you say, you study hard at school, you go through medical school, you start on that hamster wheel. And when people give you more responsibility, you're there with open arms going, yes, I'll take it because I've been waiting all my life for all of this. But as you say, sometimes things have got to give and you've got to realize what aligns best with your core values and what you need. And as opposed to thinking I need to carry on with all of this and shoulder all of that burden. And actually talking about work-life balance, we've had a question come in that says, any tips on how to manage work-life balance with training, exams, and small children? You've done it all, Fazana. So what are your pearls of wisdom?
Well, I have to say again, you guys have had it much harder. I mean, we didn't have AKT and CSA in that way. We had to just put some videos in and do one MCQ paper. So I think it would be right to say it was easier on the exam front for us, definitely. But one of the things I've done, because I was sort of always like the primary caregiver of the two kids, and I don't have any extended family, any family in London. So I worked my roles, if you like, around that. So I always did morning surgeries and Peter did the evening surgeries. So I was happy to be like part time when they started school. I went down to 5 sessions. So I did the morning surgeries and Peter was happy to do the afternoons. Many partners might not have been, of course, but now we're in the day of online and a lot more flexibility anyway. So if you need that, ask for that. I was always really keen because I had a stay at home mum. So I was really keen that it would be me picking my kids up from the school gate when they were at primary school. And that was really important to me. So I was able to make that happen with my hours. And I took roles that were flexible. So I loved being a GP appraiser, partly because I get to talk at people, which I love. And also it was completely flexible. So I could do it in the evening if they wanted to. Then as the kids grew older, and certainly I found like once they were in high school, secondary school, I still wanted to be there in the afternoon, but it didn't matter if I was back at like 5, they could bring themselves home. And now that hopefully they're either going to go to university or end up in prison or whatever they're going to do, but they're going to leave home, then I'm looking at things where I can put a bit more time in, or that there can be more like evening events and things. So I would say don't don't worry about that. Particularly, it's a good day to be a GP because you might have heard we don't have enough in the country. So you can actually say, we're apparently 5,000 short, but in real figures, we're more than 5,000 short. So say what you need, because I've certainly found that when I've been shy about saying what I need, or walking away from a role, particularly my very recent one, it was like you were saying, we work hard for these roles, and it's very flattering. It was very flattering to be asked. It was my first national role. I thought that's so great. I've made it, and then it didn't like feel quite right. And I thought once I'd walked away, oh, that's it now. It'll be the end. But it isn't. People still call because they know you. And I think if you work with your values, whatever they are, and we'll have different ones, people know that authenticity. You will always have opportunity. They'll come to you.
Absolutely, we can never go wrong with being our true selves and authentic, as you absolutely said. And I guess a lot of questions have sort of come in on that theme of work-life balance, managing it around having children or accepting new roles, and also in terms of setting boundaries. I guess from the story you've told us, Farzana, of your life, is that there's been significant challenges along the way. Of course, even from training with your mum, the loss of your mum at a young age, and then with your partner and things going on. I mean, do you feel sort of differently as to how you felt at that day at 19 years old as to now, in terms of you've gone from strength to strength, as we can clearly see, but from being a trainee transitioning now into such a successful practice? And I should mention to the 100 or so people listening, Farzana was the GP of the year in 2019. That's a huge accolade we can't forget. So to being, one of the best GPs in the country, what are the main lessons that you've taken with you?
So that's such a good question. To be absolutely honest, I still feel like I did when I was 19. I think I have a bit more experience and knowledge, and I'm, getting older. So I think I have that, but I still feel like I'm 19. And every time I think about another role, I think, can I do this? Can I do this? But you do get a bit of experience, don't you? And you think, oh well, I walked away from that one. It was okay. I wasn't very good at that one. That was okay. So, for example, I really wanted to be appraisal lead. Used to be a GP appraiser, and I went for the interview. My children were still at primary school, and I said, I just want to tell you that I can't do after 3:30 meetings. And they said, fine, fine, fine. And then within 2 weeks, they said, oh, every month you're going to have a 4 o'clock meeting, and it's going to be somewhere else. And I thought, oh, I thought I told you this. And it was absolutely wrenching to say, I don't want to do this role anymore. But I said, I was clear about it. I don't want to do it anymore. And then the opportunity came later. So I didn't do that role. I chose at that point that actually picking my kids up was more important to me. And then I never was appraisal lead after that, but I got other opportunities. And I think this is nobody's fault. I would say if I'm going to lay blame, I will lay blame on the system, because our system for medical training is still a little bit punitive. It's, go through the hamster wheel and jump now, and you jump at 1 meter now, and then when you're a fifth year, you jump at 2 meters, and it's still a bit didactic. And, we have, 100 or so, 97 really intelligent people on this webinar. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got into medical school. You're highly cognitively intelligent, and it's about, and your GPs, you're highly emotionally intelligent. So don't be afraid to say this just doesn't work for me right now, and this is fine. Because life throws stuff at us, doesn't it? I mean, I've shared some of my obstacles. We'll all have some. We've just had a pandemic. I mean, I'm a British Bangladeshi Muslim woman. I never thought I'd be going through a divorce, but after 25 years of marriage, I'm going through a divorce. And every time you just think everything's great, then something happens. And I guess it sounds cliche, but it's how we react to things, and what your purpose is. Every time I think, oh gosh, why did it happen to me now? Why am I going through a divorce? I think, well, actually, I've just been speaking to a patient who's a victim of domestic violence. At least I've never been hit. And I think that's probably part of the reason, a bit like Duncan was saying, my interaction with my patients of all the roles I do has always been my anchor, because working in Newham, when I've seen really horrible things, and all of you will, it's not just, real poverty, or there's domestic violence, I just take that as an example, everywhere, and you just think, oh, my life's not that bad, it's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think some of the words you said really resonated with what one of my trainers once said to me when I was feeling particularly, swamped with everything that was going on, and you want to take on responsibilities and you want to do all of these things, as you have said, through your career. And it's have a sense of self and knowing your self-worth, and those things, I think, as GPs, because we're in a vocational training scheme, it's not called VTS for nothing. We are giving so much of ourselves to patients, but being aware of what is rightfully ours, that makes us feel good, and sticking, as I've always said, to our core values. One of the really sort of interesting parts of your story, Farzana, that I think will have touched a lot of people is obviously finding out one day that your mentor and trainee was sadly no longer there, but along with the the push from your HCA and your team deciding to continue to go on, and you said each day it got a little bit easier. I'm wondering, I think it might be useful just to hear, were there any sort of organizations or support groups or anything you did utilize to help yourself through that time? Of course, a lot of people will be going through similar, maybe not the same sort of environment, but bereavement and things, and working in healthcare. How did you manage that?
So I have to say, I mean, I've contributed to a BMJ article about this, because I don't think there still is enough support. So I did contact the practitioner health program, which Claire's coming to speak. But that was for me personally. In terms of my team, I decided to ask our local psychologists, our cognitive behavioral therapists, to come and just speak with them, because obviously they were very upset about the whole thing. But I had to organise that. I mean, they didn't charge me, I had to organise that. And there was actually invisible CCG support. So there was the PHP program was great, and I used it briefly, and then I didn't feel I needed it anymore. But overall, as a system or organisations, I would say actually there was no support. And I know that the BMA are looking into this, and it was, gosh, a few months ago. I think she's called the Louise Tebbit Foundation Trust. I can't remember her name, but it's someone Tebbit, and it's her ex-partners, that they had a suicide, and they've named the trust after the GP who died, who were trying to campaign for this. Because I don't want to sound depressing, but I'm sad to say I'm seeing a lot more mental health amongst colleagues and friends after the pandemic. So it's not going away. And I perhaps got a bit busy, like running the practice and everything. But my advice to my former self and to you would be a bit more demanding about that support. I mean, I didn't go to the CCG or anything, but I think looking back, it would have been good to. If the support's not coming to you, you probably you deserve it. You need to ask for it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that has been a realization that has been there all along, but particularly this pandemic has shown, is that as GPs, trainees, healthcare practitioners, we're not immune to hardship and adversity and all the things that life will throw along the way. It's that we have the joys of our jobs and also the adversities that come along with it as well. And how we are there as advocates for our patients, but we should be looking out for colleagues and others. When you're thinking someone's having a hard time, having that cup of tea and that conversation, you might be doing someone a really big service to them, because right when they need it. Slightly changing track a little bit, Farzana, we've had a question on the system, and it's just saying, so this person's about a CCT this August, and they have both, in a very lucky position, they have both their ST1 and ST3 surgeries asking for them to come back and join them, but they've declined both of them because actually they want some time out to rest and maybe locum for a bit. They haven't quite decided, but they have an overwhelming sense of guilt about it. They feel they should just accept the salaried job and get on with it. And their question to you, I guess, is how can they overcome that feeling?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that this person has probably, congratulations, by the way, and this person has probably answered their own question, because if they're having a niggle about it, then there's something that's not right for them. It might mean that it might be nothing to do with them, or the person might just not be the right time, or it might be that, for whatever reason, they just don't want to go back to those practices. There is nothing wrong with that. The fact that they've had that niggle thinking, I don't want to say yes, means that it's not the right time to say yes. And guilt is it's really interesting, isn't it? This thing of guilt. We talk about paternal maternal guilt all the time. Like if you're anyone who's a mum, I'm sure will know, like, you always feel good. Did I spend enough time with them? Are they having a go at me because? And then you think, no, they're just having a go at me because they're a teenager. And like, I'm going through a divorce. I thought I'd always remind, what was my responsibility, what was my guilt. And then I think, actually, is that going to help anything? Because it's a lot of energy. Guilt is one of those really draining energies from us, isn't it? And if it was going to move us forward, that's great, but it doesn't. So I think your mind and body is telling you that at the moment, for whatever reason, you want to say no to that and stand firm in that. And I'm sure you can always go back anyway, because we're looking for doctors.
Absolutely. I think it's harnessing and embracing the things that help you move forward. You're right. And it's having that ability to have the positive things that are going to be positive for you in the long term, as opposed to and I can imagine it's an enviable position to be offered salary jobs left, right and center, but if that's not right for you, as you rightly say, Farzana, got to trust your gut. And I think we'll sort of, there's been lots and lots of questions for that, I'm not surprised at all. But the one that I've sort of picked to sort of finish this session off is it's quite a meaty one, but we were talking about systems and general practice as a whole. Is how do you think general practice has changed in the last 20 years that you've been practicing, but also where do you think it may be going in the next 20?
Oh gosh, what a great question. We haven't got another hour. So I think that the main changes I've seen is the amount of regulation and the amount of evidence. So, and that's right to trainee years. I mean, I say we put some videos in for our training, and we did an MCQ paper, and there was a lot of trust that actually that we would be, good GPs because we'd had a good year of training. And I mean, I haven't trained for a few years now, but my poor STs are like, they've got so much exam stress that it's just like seeing the patients is on top. And so, but actually, there's something wrong there if seeing the patients is on top, because it should all be, the exam system should be to help that. So I've seen a lot more regulation and a lot more having to evidence what we do. That hasn't always been positive. And I think, of course, in the last 2 years, where primary care networks have formed and we're looking at like scaled up size, so general practice is getting a bit bigger. I mean, I am biased. I would say that I run a smallish list size, but I worry about the danger of losing that family practice feel and that continuity, particularly because I not only get selfish pleasure from knowing my patients, but also it's a lot safer. And I mean, there's been evidence, if you know your patient, you're going to refer less, you're going to prescribe less, them. What's going to happen in the next 20 years? Well, interesting. I think we're at a very interesting time with a new health secretary as well, who's got a different background and has been more in the financial field before, and with the pandemic and obviously the debt we've raised as a country, will be interesting to see what happens. I think the one thing that won't change is, however many organizations change and PCNs and CCGs go and ICSs come and we get more three-letter acronyms, the relationship between a patient and their family doctor and the relationship within our teams is a constant.
I couldn't have put it better myself, Farzana. I think that's absolutely, you're right. In a world of acronyms, the GP acronym will remain resolute. You're right. thank you once again so much for coming and taking the time to share your experience and your wise words to everybody. If there are any other questions, we will sort of collate them all together, and I'm sure Farzana will be happy to have a look at a later date and get back to us about things. We're actually going to head into a break now, probably a well-deserved break. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely ready for a glass of water. And so if we can aim for everybody to come back at 2:45, that will be fantastic, and we'll be ready for our next speaker. So everyone get that well-deserved break, and we look forward to seeing you in 15 minutes or so. Bye-bye.